Good afternoon. Welcome to our fourth and final Salon Talk of the 2021 season. We're so happy to have you with us. If you missed the first three, you can watch them on our website, thomascole.org, under the Education tab. I am Lisa Fox-Martin, the chair of the board, and we're so happy to have you with us. And hopefully next year, we'll be able to meet in person in Thomas Cole's new studio. So today, I'd like to introduce, you all know her, our wonderful executive director, Betsy Jacks, who will introduce our fascinating speaker today. So thank you for joining us, and I know you will enjoy this informative talk. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our last Sunday Salon of 2021. And this has been our monthly lecture series from January through April, which started back in 2004. We've made this program free as part of our Diversity, Equity, and Access initiative. And the subject this month is the environment, to coincide with Earth Day, which is coming up in 11 days. Earth Day is now the largest secular observance in the world, with more than 1 billion people participating. However, at the Thomas Cole site, we like to celebrate Earth Day all year long because Cole was one of the first to raise his voice in alarm about the changes in our environment and to urge us to take action. Here's one of my favorite quotes from Cole. He loved the American landscape, and this is what his response in what he was seeing around him. I cannot but express my sorrow that the beauty of such landscapes are quickly passing away. The ravages of the axe are daily increasing. The most noble scenes are made desolate, and oftentimes with a wantonness and barbarism, scarcely credible in a civilized nation. You can learn more about our greening initiative at thomascole.org/greening, where we have listed our current efforts, our future efforts that we hope to achieve in the coming years. And I'm very proud of that. It was started by one of our staff, Heather Parabak, back when she started with our organization, and she has really led the way. So I commend Heather very much. Today, I'm thrilled to bring you a speaker who's making a tremendous difference on our planet, Judith Enck. Judith was appointed by President Obama as the Regional Administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, overseeing environmental protection in New York, New Jersey, 8 Indian nations, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. She's a visiting faculty member at Bennington College, where she teaches classes on plastic pollution, and was a visiting scholar at the Elisabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University. She also hosts a roundtable show every Friday morning on WAMC, the Northeast Public Radio station. You may have heard her there. And her efforts on the issue of plastic pollution are just extraordinary. I have a lot of questions for her afterwards if they're not answered in her talk, because it's been very complicated to try to do better. Seems more and more complicated as our products proliferate. I'd like to also remind everyone that we will have a chance to do Q&A after the lecture, and you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to type into your questions, and then I will read them aloud to Judith so that she can address as many as we have time for. So please welcome, at home, clapping as you may, Judith Enck. Thank you.
Thanks, Betsy. Really appreciate that welcome. One little correction. I'm not the host of the Roundtable on WAMC. That's the amazing Joe Donahue, but I am a panelist every Friday morning. So tune in every day to the Roundtable. It's an amazing show. I'm really excited to be with the supporters and the boosters of the Thomas Cole House. I grew up in Cairo in Greene County. I went to high school at St. Patrick's High School, just a few blocks from your historic site. The school, as you may know, is now closed. I graduated in the class of 1977. Do not do the math. It was a great community to learn in. And people often ask me how I got started doing environmental advocacy. And it's really hard to pinpoint a moment. I have a couple that stand out, but one is when I was in high school, I would join some of my high school friends and we would go water skiing. Remember that? We would go water skiing on the Hudson River. and work really hard not to fall in, because almost always there was a rainbow sheen on the surface of the river, of course, due to petroleum pollution. So the river has come a long way, which is due to the work of advocates from all over the country. I also got married at Olana. My husband and I did in 1982. So I feel a real affinity for the work that you all do. And now I'm working almost exclusively on plastic pollution, and I'll explain why and what you can do to help. First slide, please. So the first slide is just me and where you can get more information. We work hard to keep our website up to date, Beyond Plastics, that's a plural.org. Next slide, please. So I used to work for this guy, Barack Obama, and the nice thing about being appointed by a president to your job is you know when your job is over. It's over on his last day as president, unless you screw up and they fire you, and thankfully I didn't. So that left me a lot of time to think about what I wanted to do next. And I definitely wanted to work on a difficult issue that not enough people were working on, that touched all of my priorities, specifically environmental justice, water quality, oceans, toxics, solid waste issues, climate change, and equity. And that inevitably led me to work on plastic pollution issues. Next slide. These issues should have bipartisan support. Betsy mentioned Earth Day, happy early Earth Day, which is coming up on April 22nd. This was the first Earth Day in 1970, which led Richard Nixon to establish the Environmental Protection Agency. Next slide. Certainly the most dominant issue facing our economy, our planet, our future today is climate change. And I'll touch on that a little bit, but if you want to do some more reading on climate change, read anything by Bill McKibben, a very smart guy and author, and he's on the advisory committee to Beyond Plastics. Next slide. And also I am inspired by the work of young people. This is Greta Thunberg. She's the teenage climate activist from Sweden. And at age 17, the tender age of 17, she launched a student movement demanding more action and faster action on climate change. Next slide, please. So I teach at Bennington College in Southern Vermont, which was mentioned. I teach public policy classes and also every semester a class on plastic pollution. And due to COVID, that class is now offered online and open to community people. So it's a 7-week class in the evening. The current class is underway with 111 students. And I encourage you to sign up for the next class. You can attend as an auditor or as a student, which will start in September. So 18 million tons of plastic enter the ocean every year. Humans have made 8.3 billion tons of plastic since 1950. And half of all plastic was made since in the last 14 years. So this is a contemporary issue that's getting worse, but there's a whole lot more that we can do to stop it, and there is time. And when I first started looking at this issue, I was wondering, is all this plastic coming from ships that are illegally dumping at sea? Well, some of it is, but the vast majority of plastic in the ocean comes from city streets, from beaches, and basically from the land. So if you're walking around Catskill, for instance, and somehow a plastic bag escapes from your hand and it gets into the street, it rains, it goes washed into a storm sewer, is discharged into the Hudson, and then eventually can make its way into the Atlantic Ocean. If it does, it is a particular threat to fish, sea turtles, seabirds, and people. All of the plastic will break up, but it will never biodegrade. It will outlive all of us today. Next slide. And unless there's a major change in our laws, in our regulations, by 2025, scientists tell us that for every 3 pounds of fish in the ocean, there will be 1 pound of plastic. And that is the statistic that just stopped me in my tracks and made me decide that I need to do a whole lot more on this issue. And it's the smaller pieces of plastic that are an even greater problem. We are concerned about microplastics, which is 5 millimeters or less. So that's kind of the size of a grain of salt. So let me explain how this works. Your plastic bag or plastic bottle gets washed into the Hudson, into the Atlantic Ocean. Sunlight will make the plastic brittle. And then the wave action in the ocean acts almost like a paper cutter. So one single plastic bag or plastic bottle will become hundreds or thousands of smaller pieces of plastic, which are then eaten by fish, seabirds, marine life, and sometimes us. The United Nations has documented that over 663 species have already been impacted by plastic pollution. And you may notice in the media, every so often there'll be a report of a dead whale washing up on a beach with a massive amount of plastic in its stomach. Next slide. This is a particular problem for seabirds. This is a real picture. This is an albatross. This is not unusual. The seabirds mistake red or orange plastic, for instance, for shrimp or other food. And so the mature birds will eat the plastic. They'll feel full, but they're not getting any nutrition from it. And they often will die, or they will bring the little bits of plastic back to the nest for chicks, and the chicks will try to eat it and choke to death. You may have heard of big floating islands of plastic in the ocean. They're known as Gyrers, G-Y-R-E-S. Don't pay attention to those giant islands on the surface of the ocean or the sea, because that's not where most of the plastic winds up. Over 99% of the plastic will fall to the bottom of the sea. It won't just exist on the surface. So that makes it almost impossible to remove once it's in the ocean. Next slide. Many people don't realize that this is a climate change issue. Plastics historically were made from oil and chemicals. They're now made from chemicals and fracked gas, a byproduct of fracked gas, which is ethane. Next slide. So this is what a typical hydrofracking pad looks like. And yes, homes can be that close. This is not to scale. But what we see happening now is take a look at the ethane gas, the flare, with the orange gas being vented into the atmosphere. What's been happening lately is that orange colored gas is now being captured by pipelines. It's being captured and then sent by pipeline to new facilities known as ethane cracker plants. Next slide. These are multi-billion-dollar facilities that take the byproduct of hydrofracking, ethane, they heat it to a high temperature and they crack it. That's why it's got the unusual name of a cracker plant. And it becomes ethylene. And that is the building block for making single-use plastic packaging. This is a multi-billion-dollar facility being built in Monica, Pennsylvania by Shell. And if many of these facilities are built, it will make single-use plastics cheaper than it even is today. There are ethylene cracker facilities proposed in Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, Louisiana, and Texas. And here is why this is a major climate change issue. These ethylene cracker facilities emit large amounts of air pollution, air toxics that affect people who live near the facility. They also emit large amounts of carbon, which is carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. These facilities are super emitters of carbon. And what's happening in the fossil fuel industry today is, as we as a nation and as a world, we're moving away from using so much coal and oil and gas to generate electricity, for instance, and we're making important investments in clean renewables like wind and solar and geothermal. We're also using less petroleum because our cars and buses and fleets are moving toward electric vehicles. So plastic production is the fossil fuel industry's plan B. This is how they are going to survive in the future, but they will continue to emit a lot of carbon. According to the Center for International Environmental Law, if all of these type of plastic facilities that are proposed, if they're actually built, by 2030, the air emissions from these facilities will be, the greenhouse gas air emissions will be the same as what you would get from 295 new coal-fired power plants. So it's only taken us about 60 years to shut down most of the nation's coal plants. If we see this new fleet of ethylene cracker plants come online, they'll emit just as much greenhouse gas as 295 new coal-fired power plants. Next slide. Plastic production is also an environmental justice issue. These oil and gas and chemical facilities are almost always sited in low-income communities and communities of color. This is the amazing Sharon Levine, who is a citizen living in St. James Parish. That's the same as a county in Louisiana. And she is the head of an organization called Rise St. James. And they are taking on Formosa Plastic in Cancer Alley. There's a part of Louisiana where the cancer rates are so high that it's actually named Cancer Alley. And so if this Formosa plant is built, it will be another major new source of water pollution and also air pollutants like benzene, volatile organic compounds, nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide, and particulates. And I maintain that if these facilities were proposed in more affluent communities, in whiter communities, they would not be approved for operation. Next slide. Plastic is also very much a health issue. This is probably a very common scene for you. It's in almost every American supermarket. It's not good to breathe or eat plastic, period. 40% of plastic ever produced was for plastic packaging. So this type of packaging, you know, you'll bring that container of watermelon home, you'll eat it in 15 minutes, maybe less, and then that plastic container stays with us for centuries. Food packaging is a major concern because plastic packaging also has toxic additives, and the chemicals can migrate from the packaging into the food. And some will degrade faster than other. For instance, if your food comes in polystyrene container, the trade name from Dow is styrofoam, but the technical name is polystyrene. If that polystyrene comes in contact with acidic food or UV light or heat, the styrene, which is a known carcinogen, will leach into the food. So for instance, never have a cup of hot tea in a polystyrene cup. Next slide. The chemical PFOA, one of the forever chemicals, is used in food packaging. For instance, it's a grease-proof barrier in fast food packaging and also microwavable popcorn bags. If you've learned nothing else from this talk today, please remember, do not eat microwavable popcorn because the PFOA will leach into the popcorn. And we know that PFOA in drinking water has been known to cause kidney cancer, testicular cancer, thyroid disease, and other illnesses. So I never eat microwavable popcorn. Plastics are showing up in our bodies when tested. Next slide. The sad reality is each of us are breathing in, next slide, please. Each of us are breathing in or consuming the equivalent of 1 credit card size amount of plastic each week. Is it possible to go to the next slide? There we go. So think of that quantity, 1 credit card size of plastic each week we are breathing in or drinking in our food or our beverages. Health researchers need to do a huge amount of work looking at what are microplastics doing to us and are they being absorbed by the bloodstream? We don't know enough. Next slide, please. In January of this year, just a few months ago, the scientific journal Environments International published an important paper by a group of Italian scientists, and we're having one of them speak on a Beyond Plastic webinar that we're doing in May as part of Women's Health Month. This group of scientists documented for the first time evidence of microplastics in the human placenta. Next slide, please. So let that sink in for a minute. Microplastics on both the maternal side and the fetal side of the placenta. So we need to do much more research about what happens to our bodies when we eat and drink microplastics. Next slide. Microplastic is in drinking water. There's an amazing scientist, Dr. Sherry Mason at Penn State. She identified microplastics in tap water and twice as many microplastics in bottled water. So that's not a total surprise since bottled water typically comes in plastic bottles, which get warm when they're being transported. And also the theory is when you turn the bottle cap, little pieces of microplastics may fall into your drinking water. Next slide. Plastic is in seafood, especially seafood that you eat whole, like mussels and shrimp and oyster. So you're probably sitting there thinking, why did I tune into this talk on a beautiful Sunday afternoon? Is there any hope? And you know the answer. Someone is going to say, why don't we just recycle all of this plastics? Now, I do want to say that I am a big supporter of recycling. Next slide, please. But we cannot recycle our way out of the plastics problem. You definitely should keep recycling paper, cardboard, metal, glass, but plastics recycling has been an abysmal failure. In most communities, the only plastic you should put in your recycling bin are the ones that are labeled on the bottom as number 1 or number 2 plastic. No other plastic should be put in your recycled bin because there's really no reliable market to recycle it. And nationwide, plastic recycling has achieved an abysmal rate of 8.5% recycling. So we obviously cannot recycle our way out of the problem, yet companies are spending millions of dollars saying, don't worry about all this plastic, just put it in your recycling bin and it's your fault and it's my fault and we should feel guilty about it. But we shouldn't, because we work hard not to purchase plastic and you often just have no choice. So we need laws and regulations that change plastic packaging. The fundamental solution, you know what it is. Next slide, please. The fundamental solution is to stop making so much plastic. However, because plastic is made from fossil fuel, which is subsidized by the government, hopefully that will change in the Biden administration, but plastic is cheap. And so it's expected to increase at least 4-fold in production by 2050. I'm not against all plastic. There are some important uses of plastic. For instance, plastic car bumpers will make cars lighter and more fuel efficient. You need some plastic in medical devices, but I think hospitals have swung a little too far on so much plastic. But if you look at single-use plastic, things that are around for a short period of time and that we regularly find littered on our streets, we can do a much, much better job reducing that. So what do we do to reduce that? Next slide. One is we take political action. I like this photo because I like the sign, Polars for Solar. And that was an event in Albany objecting to previous President Trump's proposal to open offshore the Atlantic to oil and gas drilling. And, there's a lot you can do to get informed. Next slide. I mentioned I teach an online class on plastic pollution. It's been really interesting. I typically teach this just for Bennington College students in person, but since COVID, we moved it online. We always have over 100 students from all over the world. Most of the students audit the class. 95% of the students are women. And these are people who want to take action on plastic pollution. And we cover the range of problems, including that there are alternatives to plastic. And we don't necessarily have to wait for some big breakthrough while they are not without environmental impact. We have paper, we have metal, we have glass, and those materials can easily be made from recycled material. And there are some breakthroughs. There's a company in Green Island, New York, just north of Albany, called Ecovative Design. They take agricultural waste and they turn that into mycelium, a type of mushroom, and that's an alternative to polystyrene. We're also seeing some companies shift to reusable and refillable, and that's really the long-term solution, not to use single-use packaging of any material, but to shift toward reusables. And we're seeing slowly but steady progress in that area. And some of this is just very obvious. Next slide, please. My family drinks a lot of orange juice, and I didn't want to keep buying orange juice in big plastic containers. So we shifted to frozen juice and a nice glass pitcher that we put it in. It's also cheaper. So the problem is that these innovations are not happening quickly enough, and they're not happening yet at scale. And that's where consumers come in. It's such a big problem, and it's a series of things we need to do. For instance, SUNY New Paltz adopted a policy that all of their soda vending machines can no longer have plastic bottles. Everything is served in aluminum cans, which is easy to recycle. You can do that at your college or your workplace, or if you're at a hospital. Second, my organization Beyond Plastics is launching a new project this year to try to convince Meals on Wheels to shift to reusable packaging. So if any of you are interested in Meals on Wheels, it's a wonderful organization and it's very decentralized. So we want to engage with local Meals on Wheels program to share information on reusable packaging. There are a lot of different things we can do. You need to become informed. There are just a handful of groups nationwide working on this issue, which is why I decided to jump on it. Next slide, please. One of the first things we did when we started working on this issue is we developed a model bill called the Plastic Trifecta, which reduced plastic bags, plastic straws, only upon request, and bans polystyrene. Now, what's interesting is in New York, we already have a plastic bag ban in effect statewide, which is good because New Yorkers use 23 billion plastic bags every year. If you go to a store and they're handing out plastic bags, that is illegal. And you should talk to the store manager or call the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to report that. This January, a state law banning polystyrene food packaging will be in effect. But the final thing we have not succeeded on at the state level is a policy of only handing out plastic straws when the customer asks for it. So there is a bill introduced by Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal, that would adopt that policy, which is also good for restaurants. They can save a little bit of money by not always handing out plastic straws. So how do you take this plastic trifecta approach and work on it? Next slide, please. You basically do it first in your personal life, and you recognize that the implications are pretty big. The United States has fallen behind the European Union. In the EU, they've banned 10 different types of plastic items effective this year. EU has banned plastic cutlery, plates, straws, drink stirrers, sticks for balloons, and plastic Q-tips. Remember, Q-tips used to be held together by little pieces of cotton held together by cardboard. Now it's hard to find that. It's usually plastic. Next slide. And we really need to get moving because plastic production and disposal, particularly if it goes to an incinerator, is a climate change issue. And climate change is getting worse. The most obvious impact is hurricanes are getting stronger. So climate change doesn't cause hurricanes, but it makes hurricanes go from, say, a Category 2 hurricane to a Category 4 hurricane because climate change is making the ocean temperature warmer than it ordinarily would be. Next slide. I'm extremely concerned about the impacts in Puerto Rico, US Virgin Islands, the Caribbean. When I was at the EPA, I did a lot of work in those territories. This was after Hurricane Maria hit the island of Puerto Rico. Parts of Puerto Rico didn't have electricity for 11 months. So 4,000 people perished. Next slide. And then of course, wildfires. This was Australia, where about 1 billion animals died. Next slide. You remember last year, the wildfires in California and Colorado and Oregon. And as an environmentalist, it's so frustrating to see these hurricanes and wildfires and heat deaths unfold because we know that renewable energy, like wind and solar, are an economical and I would say ethical replacement for fossil fuels. Next slide, please. So, are you in? Are you willing to work with your neighbors, with the Thomas Cole House to reduce plastic? I'm so impressed with the greening initiative at Thomas Cole, and I thank Heather and Betsy and others who've worked on it. Next slide. What you want to do is become informed, and that is easier than ever before. There's a bill introduced in the Congress called the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, which is the most comprehensive federal bill to reduce plastic pollution. If you follow Beyond Plastics on social media, we will keep you updated on that. Also, if you go to our website, beyondplastics.org, you can just click a button and get free updates on what's going on. Senator Schumer is really important as the Senate Majority Leader on what happens to the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. So write to him, call his office. The good news is Senator Gillibrand is already a co-sponsor. Thank her for that. My Congress member, who I think is your Congress member, the wonderful Antonio Delgado, is a co-sponsor of the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. So thank him for that. There's really a lot we can do. Next slide. So if you want more information, that's where we are at Bennington College. Of course, I need to ask you to consider making a donation to Beyond Plastics. We're a small project based at the college. They are our fiscal sponsor. Our staff is 3.5 people and growing, and we get a lot done. We are on the cutting edge of this issue. And the only way we will make progress is with public support. Next slide, please. So let me hand this back over to Betsy, where we will have some time for some interesting questions and answers, and particularly urge you to speak out if there are things that you disagree with. Thank you.
So much, Judith. And some questions are already coming into the Q&A function. So for those of you who haven't found it there, if you move your cursor to the bottom of the screen, Q&A, the taskbar will hopefully pop up and you can press the Q&A and have a window where you can type in your questions. So please do. While they come in, I have a question to lead us off. So we've been making switches all around our house to get rid of the bottles for all the soaps and detergents and washing machine and dishwashing and all those things. But I've come across an issue that I am having trouble solving, which is that my daughter runs a home bakery business and and she loves to bake, and we are trying to find a way to package her cookies and send them in the mail. And I thought we could just put them in a paper bag, but a regular paper bag gets soaked with the butter, and then all the other ones are lined with plastic. So I wondered if you had any recommendations. It's much more complicated. I found a website that said they have the plastic liners are made from vegetables, but then someone told me that, well, those leach terrible greenhouse gases into the air. So I'm stymied.
Well, it's a small business, so I don't know if ecovative design would be an option, but check them out, ecovativedesign.com. They're in Green Island. I don't think they're, I take that back, because I don't think they're approved for food packaging yet. They're approved for like shipping. I know they had a contract with Dell Computer. So they, like if you order a computer online, instead of it showing up in polystyrene foam, it shows up in their packaging, which truly is compostable. That is a really hard one. I will keep thinking about it. There are some, I was just online this morning ordering coffee from Dean's Beans, a wonderful B corporation in Massachusetts, and they have some chocolates that they sell, which I have to admit, I was not looking to buy chocolate, but I did in addition to coffee. Check out what they're using, because they are super socially conscious.
All right, I'll find out.
And most of the innovation going on is with soaps, and I'm not sure. Someone's mentioning the Honest Weight Food Co-op. So any food co-op would be definitely worth checking with.
Thank you. So we have a lot of questions piling up, so I'll get to them. The first one is talking about if insurance companies are getting involved, because the questioner here says, I would think they are struggling to settle claims from climate change related disasters.
Well, insurance companies are getting very involved in the climate change issue because it's costing them a lot of money, as mentioned. But they don't seem to have really figured out the connection between plastic production and disposal and climate change. So I've not seen any visibility on the plastics issue, but definitely on climate change, because claims are up and people's home insurance is going up, and there are a lot of locations where you can't get insurance. For instance, after Hurricane Maria hit the US Virgin Islands, the governor of the US Virgin Islands called me. I'd since left EPA, and he asked me if I would just come down as an individual and help them with the very complicated environmental elements of cleaning up after a hurricane. So of course I said, sure. I got the first flight into St. Thomas, and was so surprised to learn that a lot of people in the US Virgin Islands were self-insured because insurance companies would not insure them because of concerns about hurricanes. So this is a huge problem for the insurance industry, and I hope to see them speak out more on the plastics issue. They haven't, as far as I know.
Another person asked about compostable plastic packaging. How is it produced, and is this a good alternative? We had an event last night, an opening, and we used spoons that were, I think, made of bamboo. They seemed like some kind of wood product. But I have been to other events where it feels like plastic, but it says compostable.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is so tricky. So the good news is that it's not made from fossil fuel, but it is made from sugar and potatoes and other agricultural products. And it doesn't really break down. It goes by the phrase bioplastics. And the difficulty is that if it goes to a high temperature commercial composting operation, it may break down, but most communities don't have a facility like that. So you don't want to put something like that in your backyard compost bin, for instance. So we've arrived at a point where people are conscious of the problems with plastic, and they're willing to spend a lot of extra money for compostable plastics, but compostable plastics is really a myth. It's not a real soil amendment like you would get with real composting of just yard waste and food waste. So, I think it's kind of the false promise. And what you really want to do, and it means cooperating with caterers and get, real metal utensils. And then they have to bring it back and wash them, which a lot of places do have dishwashing equipment. So it's been interesting as public awareness has increased, so has the greenwashing. But I am quite concerned about bio-based plastics or compostable plastics. And then some of them, when they do break down, they just break down into smaller pieces of plastic in the environment, and they're a greater risk to fish and wildlife. But thanks for trying.
How about the bamboo spoon idea? Is that
Yeah, the thing with bamboo though is when it's done, you'll just throw it out in the trash. So it's better that it's not petroleum based, and that's technically not a bioplastic. So that might be a middle ground. But I think more and more facilities like yours, if you say you want real dishes and real utensils, when I was at EPA, I always said no single-use disposables at events. And caterers would say more and more they were getting that request. And that is really the way to go, because there are so many trade-offs with things like bamboo and so-called compostable plastics. It's easier just to go with reuse.
Okay, let's see. I recently bought a pair of jeans that claim to be made with recycled plastics. Can this be trusted?
Well, it probably is. It's called downcycled. So like plastic soda bottles are made into fleece or jeans. The problem is when you wash them, you get little bits of microplastic coming out of your washing machine hose. And I didn't have time today to talk about microplastics in fabrics, but that is a huge issue. So I tend, just personally, I appreciate the effort of people trying to support recycling, but I never buy any clothing made from recycled plastic.
So complicated, isn't it? Let's see. Besides reducing plastic use, how do you feel about incineration plants as a way to remove plastic from our environment?
I am strongly opposed to incineration plants. And the reason is because they even quote state-of-the-art modern incinerators, which we have on the Hudson River in Poughkeepsie and up in Washington County, still emit a large amount of air pollution, including carbon. And they particularly like to burn plastic, because plastic is basically a fossil fuel product. It's made from chemicals and used to be oil. Now it's ethane byproduct. So incinerators are happy to get large amounts of plastic to burn. They find it easier than burning other materials. But the incinerators are almost always sited in a low-income area. They don't eliminate the need for landfills. For every pound of garbage that you burn, you get about a third pound of ash that needs to be disposed of. And people in Greene County might recall the proposal about 2 or 3 years ago to site an ash landfill near the Hudson River in Cementon, which a lot of grassroots leaders got involved and thankfully blocked. So that's kind of the dirty little secret with incineration, is you get a lot of ash that needs to be landfilled, and hopefully never at an old mine near the Hudson River. And incinerators are really expensive. So I don't think they're a solution at all. And now companies are proposing kind of more sophisticated types of incineration facilities like pyrolysis, gasification. And again, the solution to the crisis is making less plastic. You know, if you walk into your bathroom and your bathtub is overflowing, the first thing you do is you turn off the tap. It's not, you know, looking for a mop or towels. It's stopping the problem at the source. And that's really what we need to do with plastics.
This is a good question. So a member of our community here in Catskill says, how do we take the Coal House initiative of greening to the community level here in Catskill? What should our first concrete steps be? So yes, we, you know, it starts locally. So what can a community like Catskill do? Step one.
Oh, a lot. You know, I think your greening initiative is very impressive and should be replicated at other institutions, at schools, at businesses. I mean, you've got a list of impressive things that other organizations or businesses can pick and choose from. I did notice in the New York State budget that was just adopted last week, there is a provision to provide financial support for governmental institutions that want to install electric charging stations and more support for electric vehicles. So, you know, as Americans, we like one big solution to one big problem. It's usually like one big technological solution, like build an incinerator and burn everything and don't worry about all the production of plastics. On this issue, and I think on climate change in general, it's a bunch of very discrete, effective steps. It's installing electric charging stations. It's making sure that all of your catering contracts require reusable dishes and foodware. It's solar panels. It's not opposing wind and solar large scale when they're proposed. If we want to solve the climate crisis, we're all going to have to deal with wind and solar in our communities, even if it affects your view shed. It's using more recycled material. It is educating people like you are. So, I mean, I think the Thomas Coal House is a really wonderful, practical, green example. And I think the thing is to replicate it, you know, replicate it at Catskill High School, go into elementary schools and talk about what can happen. Little kids understand environmental degradation. They're really good recyclers. When they get into middle school, they get pretty savvy on climate change. And they should, because, you know, there's a lot at stake. You know, the United Nations says we only have about 11 years to avoid catastrophic climate change. I think for a lot of communities, catastrophic climate change is already here. So, you know, take your model and export it, and also export it to other national historic sites. I'm sure you're a part of an organization or a network, and, you know, are all national historic sites doing this? No, they're not. So you're a model for them, and you should brag on yourselves.
Thank you. Well,
get the word out around Earth Day.
Yeah, I think that's really it was eye-opening to me that it can be incremental. And so that at thomascoal.org/greening, we've basically just started small by saying, what can we do that, you know, money's always an issue. So what are some lower cost ways to start? How much would it cost to switch these things, do some investigating. And then a donor this year sponsored installing that electric vehicle charging station at the Thomas Cole
Right.
parking lot. So
Right.
it was just, steps. So that has been, again, I credit Heather on our staff for leading the way on that. So I'll look at another question here. This person's a regular listener to you on the roundtable, Judith, and asked, when the supermarkets use plastic bags, they also had a bin to put the plastic in. Now that there is a bag ban, and also because of COVID, supermarkets don't have those bins anymore. What can I do with the plastic bags that we already have, or bags that come as part of packaging?
Yeah, I think a lot of those bins will be coming back, even though plastic bags are banned in New York. Supermarkets are required to also have those bins. And so I think as COVID hopefully eases, we will see those bins back. In the meantime, reuse your plastic bags. Yeah, we have produce bags, we have, bread bags, we have frozen food bags. I've been saving mine. I've got and it's like such a reminder of how much plastic, even when you're trying to avoid it. The thing with produce bags also is you can buy reusable produce bags, and supermarkets are used to that. There's like a little part of the bag that says how much the bag weighs. So it takes it off the cost of your produce. Shift to reusable produce bags if you can, but for things like bread bags and things you can't avoid, just keep saving it. I'm also kind of suspicious of those bins. When I worked at the EPA, we lived in Brooklyn because my office was in Lower Manhattan. And the bins in some of those supermarkets were also filled with garbage. So I think the places that I trust that actually recycle that film plastic, and film plastic, by the way, only achieves a 5.5% recycling rate, so it's not much. But the places I trust to recycle those bags are Hannaford and also Whole Foods. I've been known to go to Whole Foods just to drop off plastic bags. They also take wine corks. And so I will drop stuff off there and then not shop there because it's whole paycheck. And I'd much rather go to the Honest Weight Food Co-op in Albany. But anyone can drop off the bags at Hannaford or Whole Foods.
This is another question, perhaps maybe your work on a larger scale. Have you considered working with or pressuring companies like Amazon to reduce the enormous quantities of plastic packaging they use?
Absolutely. We would love to partner with big companies. And in fact, I have spoken to an executive at Amazon, and I got absolutely nowhere. And they claim that they use a lot of plastic because it's lighter and they think it's better for greenhouse gas emissions, but they don't consider the production of plastic, the fact that those Amazon envelopes are not really recyclable. They say they are, but good luck finding one of those very small number of places that will take it. And I think Amazon is just not interested in reducing its use of plastic. So, I talk to companies all the time.
I just lost connection with Judith. Her screen froze, but I'm not sure if anyone else out there has that same issue. All right, getting some feedback saying that Judith is frozen, but I am not. Okay, well, it looks like Judith is having some connections issues, but I can still read out some of these questions. It's hard to keep up. There are so many things to figure out on this, I know. I have a question about the best way to dispose of soiled litter in cat households. I use a litter that's made from corn, and we're allowed to flush it down the toilet because it's just corn. I don't know if that's bad because the corn production is a very heavy fossil fuel industry. We'll get back to that one. And do you have any information on the safety of plastic water bottles? Are some safer than others for daily consumption? And I think this is referring to those reusable plastic water bottles. And I wonder about that too. We try to use metal ones in my house. Is it common to have well water tested for microplastics? Do reverse osmosis systems help filter out microplastics? Well, we'll see if we can get Judith back because I'm sure not going to be able to answer any of these. I think we'll give her another couple minutes because there's so many people that want to talk to her, and see if we can get her back on the line. Sounds like she had a bad internet connection. I got a note saying that this happens on the roundtable too. What do you know about used plastics incorporated into road making materials such as asphalt? Another person answers a question, says that Lowe's still takes plastic bags in Catskill. So that's a place to drop off your plastic bags, Lowe's. All right. I'll see if my staff have had any contact with Judith. Looks like she has lost her internet connection. Well, if she doesn't come back on soon, I will recommend that we have a little Q&A with her on our website, and we'll work on some way of you being able to submit questions so that we can perhaps have a few more of these answered on our website. And we have all the email addresses of the participants in this session, so I believe we have a way of getting in touch with you all. My staff has said that they've invited her back and they're calling her, but they haven't been able to reach her. So I'm guessing her internet just went out. Anyway, I would like to thank Judith for, I feel like I could talk to her all day. This is so important and so complicated. I would also like to thank all the funders for this program. This year's Sunday Salons are dedicated to the memory of our longtime supporter, David Gray. And support for this series is also provided by a Humanities New York Action Grant with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the New York State Council on the Arts with support of Governor Andrew M. Cuomo and the New York State Legislature, Empire State Development's I Love New York program under the Market New York Initiative, and thank you to you out there in the Kindred Spirit Society of the Thomas Cole National Historic Site. They are our foundational supporters. So thank you, all of you out there as part of our Kindred Spirit Society. I don't hear Judith coming back on, so I think maybe we'll have to end it there. And thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope to see you here at the Thomas Cole site when we have right now going on a program called Spring Lights, which is on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday evenings, which is an outdoor walkthrough event. So it is COVID compliant, and you can get tickets on the thomascole.org website and then walk through this experience. Oh, Judith, you're back in the nick of time.
I'm so sorry, we had a little power outage here, of course.
Of course. Well, all right. Let's see. I just finished all the credits, so we're done with that part. I can get to the questions. So one of them is about cat litter. How do you dispose of soiled cat litter in cat households? Any ideas on that one?
I've never been asked that question. And I'm afraid I have no idea. I don't know
if that involves plastic. I buy one that's made with corn. And so
there you go.
Flushable. All right. This is an interesting one. What are the origins of scientific denialism in climate change? What is up with that?
Well, it's really prompted by the fossil fuel industry. They've spent massive amounts of money trying to convince the public that climate change is not a problem. It's really about special interest politics. It's not about science at all. 99% of independent scientists, it's been documented. If you look at independent scientific articles, peer-reviewed articles, over 99% confirm that humans have contributed to climate change. So we've been a victim of false advertising. What's interesting on the plastics issue is, you know, I've met lots of climate change deniers. I've not yet met a plastic pollution denier. And that's because the plastic litter is everywhere for us to see. You know, in the springtime, you'll see the plastic bags in trees. You'll see plastic food packaging on the side of the road, especially after the snow melts. But it's sadly all about special interest politics and fossil fuel and chemical companies not wanting to give up market share.
Another question is about reusable water bottles that are made from plastic. Are they safe?
Well, you have to make sure they don't contain BPA. I've gotten rid of all plastic packaging, even reusable. You know, I used to save plastic containers from takeout food, but I'm so concerned about the leaching into plastic. Never put plastic containers in the microwave, as people probably know, but also don't put it in the dishwasher if you wash in hot water. So if you want a reusable bottle, I would definitely recommend metal rather than plastic.
What do you know about plastics incorporated into road making materials such as asphalt?
Yeah, that is just emerging now. I don't think it's a good idea because the abrasion on the road from the tires will result in microplastics becoming airborne. Sometimes they put it at the bottom layer. I just think putting more plastic into the environment is not a good idea, even if it's road construction, because eventually the roads will break down and you do have a lot of abrasion after heavy use.
Okay, I think we're down to one of our last questions. Is it common to have well water tested for microplastics? And
it's not common to have well water tested for microplastics. I don't recommend that you test well water for microplastics. I recommend you avoid buying bottled water. But you know, it certainly could be in there because the microplastics will move down into groundwater. I don't view that as a major concern today. If you do want to get your well water tested, there are probably just a couple labs that could do that. I'm not pitching particular labs, but one that is very sophisticated and Bennington College is used for Pfoa testing is called Eurofins, EUROFINS. So you could check with them.
Right. Well, we have reached 3 minutes after 3. So
sorry about
I'm sure we could I'm sure we could go on for hours. Thank you so much, Judith, for your time today. And her website is beyondplastics.org. And our greening initiative can be found at thomascole.org/greening. So thank you all. And please do come to the Thomas Cole site for Spring Lights, which is going on right now. And I hope to see you there. Thanks again, Judith.
Thanks, Betsy. Great to be with you.